This is new. This is experimental. This is a piece that I'm going to hopefully be publishing soon, and I need your help. I'm curious what you think. Provide your own feedback here in the Patreon about this particular essay that I'm going to be speaking about. The essay is titled Becoming Hoa, Hawaiian Political Thought and the Question of Settler Aloha Aina. Drop a comment in the Patreon and let me know what you think about it. Give me your advice, your suggestions, questions. Looking forward to it. A song expressed through chant, Mele Kukulu, is a mighty call and response that united and continues to unite people of Hawaiʻi. Crafted by Kumu Puakase, it recognizes the interrelated nature of political struggle and global solidarity. Her mele issues an inclusive invitation to Aloha Aina, understood most reductively as loving the land and caring for the environment, but as I'll explain, Aloha Aina means much more. Mele Kukulu marks what connects us in shared struggle, solidarity, and existence. A mountain protector, a standing rock and sacred stone, a water protector. Case provided these interpretations at the entrance of Mauna Kea Access Road during the 2019 blockade against the 30-meter telescope at the base of Mauna Kea on Hawaiʻi Island. The Kanaka Maoli-led blockade organized to defend the mountain from development of this extremely large telescope, which is a scientific term, not that clever, without free, prior, and informed consent of the indigenous people of Hawaiʻi, Kanaka Maoli, my people. Thousands upon thousands, non-Kanaka Maoli supporters included, descended on Mauna Kea to support the stand. 3 times a day, every day, we gathered in the road to fasten our commitments, led oftentimes by Case, with hula or dance, mo'olelo, storytelling, ho'okupu, formal offerings, and songs like Mele Kukulu. The mele's multiple conceptions of hoa for Kanaka Maoli scholar Kavika Tengan offer what he names is a native Pacific mode of being and binding relations. If one being hoa can mean such as being friends, partners, or comrades, then the word is also interpreted as a tying, lashing, and banding together. Commenting on the blockade's formal closure in 2020 and its sanctuary for those who sought to defend Mauna Kea, Pu'uhuluhulu, Tengan laments, quote, although the Pu'uhonua closed in response to the pandemic, the Mauna continues to inspire us to be better hoa to each other and the earth. What does it mean to be hoa and bind relations with one another and the earth? What then does it mean to be called this way and respond? How might struggle and solidarity at Mauna Kea teach us about becoming better hoa to each other and this planet? There are, however, other interpretations of hoa in Olelo Hawaiʻi, the indigenous language of Hawaiʻi. It can also mean to strike and smite with a club. The dialectic in hoa is a semantic tension I posit productively frames the construction, comprehension, and counting of solidarity. How might we sense when alliance is antagonistic, when solidarity stifling? I stew on these questions to exemplify a becoming rather than being. This exposition is more concerned with understanding how we know solidarity, specifically indigenous settler solidarity, than designating what is or is not solidarity, or identifying whom is or is not an ally. In particular, I perseverate on the promises and perils of solidarity in Hawaiʻi by inhabiting a theory of settler Aloha Aina. With an explosion of contemporary research on Aloha Aina coinciding with the development of settler colonial studies over the last 25 years, this new concept is worth appraisal. If Aloha Aina is an indigenous geontology in Hawaiʻi, a unique ecological way of being in the islands, what's settler Aloha Aina? Aloha Aina is traced to the origins of Hawaiʻi. Composed in 1700 by Keaulumoku, the Kumulipo is a cosmogenic chant indexing all creation in the islands. Containing 2,102 lines, the Kumulipo, translated literally as the source of darkness, is structured into 16 sections. The first 7 occur in Po, in darkness, and the last 9 take place in Au, daylight. Po is the beginning period belonging to Akua, our deities, whereas Au is the era of Kanaka, humans. According to its opening lines, a foundational source for creation in our cosmology is the deep black darkness. Lipo, Po, Lipo, all gave birth to the earth and are entwined in it. That is, the darkness, the night, the intense deep darkness. The common denominator here is Po, referring to darkness in both color and ecology. Po also refers to the existent Po Ele, whose name means black. Aina was born of blackness, hence blackness is Aina. The Kumulipo teaches us Aloha Aina necessitates recognition of its dark origins in night and care for manifestations of blackness in the light of day. Another relevant part of the Kumulipo forms a basis of Hawaiian political thought on Aloha. 2 progenitors of the islands, Papahanaumoku, foundation birthing islands, and Uahikea, broad expanse, also known as Earth Mother and Sky Father, gave birth to a daughter, Ho'ohokuokalani. Uahikea laid with her, and she conceived a child named Haloanakalaukapili, but he was stillborn. Haloanaka for short was buried, and kalo, a taro plant, grew from that burial. Uahikea and Ho'ohokuokalani laid together again and had a second child, Haloa. As the younger sibling of Haloanaka and Kalo, Haloa became one of the first humans and is considered the very first ali'i or chief. Our humanity as Kanaka is inseparable from Aina. Kalo and the Aina it grows from, Kanaka Maoli historian Noinoi Silva writes, are, quote, owed filial love, loyalty, and care, end quote, what can be understood as Aloha Aina. Commenting on the movement to protect Mauna Kea as our elder relative, sacred mountain and water source, Yokepa Kasumbo Salazar, another Kanaka Maoli scholar, claims Aloha Aina at the core of this movement is an ontogenealogical ethos to care for the land, water, and other natural beings. For him, Aloha Aina offers a philosophical imperative based on indigenous genealogical ways of being to cultivate, balance, and defend our spiritual, religious, social, and ecological relationships in Hawaii. We protect Mauna Kea because we are Mauna Kea. And being of Aina means knowing how to relate Aina to Aina. Kanaka Maoli intellectuals of the 19th century knew this before Hawaiian political theorists of today. One such brilliant ancestor is Joseph Navahi. Amidst political tribulations at the end of the 19th century, he and his partner, Emma Navahi, started a newspaper called Aloha Aina. In its inaugural 1895 issue, Navahi wrote an editorial, Aloha Aina he haia. What is Aloha Aina? Like the magnetic pole of a compass's needle, he described Aloha Aina as a physical force, drawing Kanaka to land and each other with desire to care for Hawaii and in solidarity to defend its life, sovereignty, and independence. But magnets don't just attract. Although Aloha Aina has been normalized as a figurative, flowery love, Navahi recalls it's a power that attracts and repels, drawing people together and deterring forces of domination in the same step. A few months earlier, in December 1894, Navahi and other leaders of the Hawaiian Patriotic League named Hui Aloha Aina were arrested for planning an armed counter-revolution to take back control of the government from a white Euro-American oligarchy of sugar barons who illegally overthrew the Hawaiian Kingdom's government on January 17, 1893. When Navahi and others were incarcerated, royalists like Robert Wilcox continued the struggle. Preparing to fight fire with fire, they received a shipment of arms purchased from San Francisco and distributed them on the island of Oahu. On January 6, 1895, the Republic of Hawaiʻi discovered the weapons and sent police. A gunfight ensued. In what is known as the Kawakuloko or Hawaiian Civil War, royalists of the monarchy retreated, surrendering eventually to the Republic's police. Hundreds of them were imprisoned and fined, including my great-great-grandfather C.B. Maile. Unlike a civil war, this marked the beginning of a foreign invasion, continuing today as U.S. military occupation. Navahi died in 1896 from tuberculosis, contracted while imprisoned. During the resistance, he and his partner became recognized as Aloha Aina, developing into an understanding of Hawaiian patriots who loved their land and country. Aloha Aina transformed into a tacitly political identity. Those counter-revolutionaries were identified themselves as Aloha Aina. After his passing, organizers with the Honolulu chapter of Hui Aloha Aina sent a letter to his wife Emma, a respected leader at the time in Hui Aloha Aina, offering condolences. C.B. Maile was a co-author and acknowledged both Joseph and Emma as Aloha Aina this way. He and my great-great-grandmother, Ko'olau Agnes Kaniahuea Kakaina Haole Maile, who published Mele, celebrating Wilcox and the armed revolt that he championed, I recognize as Aloha Aina. Aloha Aina is a practice of becoming hoa that in turn can lead to acknowledgement as Aloha Aina. These Kanaka Maoli demonstrated Aloha Aina transformed into a subjectivity and ideology against imperialism, capitalism, and settler colonialism. So what the heck is settler Aloha Aina then? In her book, The Seeds We Planted, Noilani Goodrick Ko'opua first theorizes it. Although Candice Fujikane and her new book, Mapping Abundance for a Planetary Future, popularized the theory, the two, Goodrick Ko'opua, a Kanaka Maoli political scientist, Fujikane, a literary scholar, the two developed it together. Goodrick Ko'opua isolates settler Aloha Aina by analyzing indigenous self-determination in public education. Exploring the Lo'i project at a Hawaiian-based charter school, she discusses how teachers and students work to revitalize Lo'i kalo, taro farming. Kalo has fed us for generations, but land enclosures, private property, and water diversions over the last 2 centuries have had deleterious disruptive effects on Hawaii's environment. Indigenous knowledges and practices that sustained our people for centuries are being rebuilt still. It's at this intersection of building solidarity where settler Aloha Aina emerges. Examining an interview with a non-Kanaka Maoli teacher, Goodrick Ko'opua ruminates on how settlers in Hawaiʻi struggle to be in solidarity with Kanaka Maoli. While settlers might feel a connection and belonging to the islands, they may not wish to minimize Kanaka Maoli, our relations to them. This contemplation is noteworthy not just in the islands, but also where indigenous and non-indigenous peoples interface elsewhere. Ceded or stolen? How can one be a good settler on indigenous land? Goodrick Ko'opua and Fujikane provide some answers. Settlers, Goodrick Ko'opua suggests, can and should cultivate and protect indigenous lands. She writes, the non-Kanaka Maoli teacher repositioned his kuleana or responsibility to land at the center of his work. Taking responsibility and developing such practices, settlers might transform yet not transcend their structurally engineered position. It's also a call for material divestment from colonial capitalist forms of power, and active support of indigenous peoples whom have been dispossessed, alienated, and removed because of that system of power. The promise of this solidarity in indigenous settler relations is transformative. But there's an idealism lurking. Goodrick Ko'opua credits, quote, I thank Candice Fujikane for our discussion about these issues. of how to acknowledge the connections that non-Indigenous people cultivate with lands and Native communities without usurping Native identity or mana, power. It was in one such discussion that she posed the possible term settler Aloha Aina as a way that settlers might identify. End quote. In Fujikane's book, she flags the same exact conversation and how in dialogue settler Aloha Aina surfaced to recognize the labors of settlers in materializing decolonization itself. Settler Aloha Aina, those non-Indigenous people who love the land while not claiming it, can and should claim a responsibility in decolonization, Fujikane contends. She argues those identifying as settler Aloha Aina have an obligation not just to transform settler-colonial relations and rebuild Indigenous structures, but to actualize decolonization. Quote, being a settler and Aloha Aina are not mutually exclusive. Instead, we can break the category of settler wide open by taking our places on the front lines of movements for deoccupation and decolonization. End quote. Seeking to trouble the categorical coherence of settler and claim space on the front line, her claim reiterates settler colonial studies scholar Lorenzo Veracini's argument that there are two parallel tracks for decolonization: Indigenous decolonization and settler decolonization. He writes, quote, these tracks must remain accountable to each other, of course, but progress in one is ultimately predicated on its counterpart. How is Indigenous decolonization ultimately predicated on settler decolonization? With new research breaking open the category settler, it's prudent for especially Indigenous political theorists to investigate just how unsettling this theory really is. In an unpublished paper, Veracini praises reconsiderations of the settler. Reading this, I saw two immediate red flags in the spirit of Yellowknives Dene scholar Glenn Coulthard's work. First, Veracini's reference to the category arrivant, which refers to those forcibly removed by slavery and otherwise to settler colonies. Veracini's reference to the category arrivant guts its establishment in Black political thought by Bajan poet Kamau Brathwaite. An Afro-Caribbean theorist, Brathwaite conceived the term in his aptly titled trilogy, The Arrivants. Second, Veracini's nod to settler Aloha Aina effaces its co-creation in Indigenous political thought with the work of Goodyear Ko'opua. New categories cracking open the concept settler and pining to unsettle the Indigenous settler binary have actually been cut off from their roots in Black and Indigenous political thought. I contend the settler of settler Aloha Aina actually undermines the Aloha Aina of Hawaiian political thought. So what does it mean to be a settler Aloha Aina? Fujikane says, quote, while being part our kuleana is to play a supportive role, that should not prevent us from actively challenging the occupying state or standing against law enforcement. And there are many settler Aloha Aina and Aloha Aina who are not Kanaka Maoli who have taken on this kuleana. End quote. She concurs, being settler Aloha Aina engenders responsibility to support Kanaka Maoli. But that support shouldn't prevent taking an active stance in challenging the settler state. Yet, being a settler and being an Aloha Aina are not mutually exclusive. And there are many, she writes, identifying both ways, who are not Kanaka Maoli. Her book even offers a list. But what would compel those listed as Aloha Aina to claim being a settler Aloha Aina? Why the insistence on the settler for Aloha Aina? Paradoxically, Fujikane's analysis contains an answer. If settler late liberalism governs through a power to delineate between life and non-life, bios and geos, and this is a framework and argument Fujikane imports from Elizabeth Pavanelli, who is a theorist and anthropologist, does the qualification of Aloha Aina as settler Aloha Aina index a discursive or affective form of what Pavanelli calls gianto power, by clamoring for an attached human subjectivity. Does the settler of settler Aloha Aina break the concept of Aloha Aina apart by injecting a distinction between settler and Aloha Aina, bios and geos? Could we then understand the criticism of Verasini as a consequence of translating the dynamic order of human land relations, Aloha Aina, into the given political order of settler colonial studies, critique, and subjectivity? Although settler subjectivity has not been a central object of study for Indigenous political thought, settler colonialism most certainly is. And Indigenous critique of settler colonialism should be central to any attempted transformation of the settler. Consider a few final provocations. Could one be a settler Huakotawen, settler Ka'e, or settler Ubuntu? My point is the translation of Indigenous ecological ways of being into modes of solidarity should be carefully considered and reconsidered. An active practice and process of binding relationships within political struggle and solidarity, becoming hoa might just be a critical alternative to settler Aloha Aina. While becoming hoa is unique to Hawaiʻi, turning to Indigenous language, politics, ceremony, and protocol of the specific Indigenous peoples in which any project of Indigenous settler relations concerns itself is without doubt critical. In Mele Kukulu, Puakase provides another way of relating in struggle and solidarity as hoa, as comrades bound and continually binding together. Ina hoa aina e, ina hoa velolike, ina hoa pilie, ina hoa aloha, Aloha Aina. Native people of Hawaiʻi, Native people of the Pacific, Native people of Turtle Island, friends in our struggle, Aloha Aina.